thank you very much, everyone, for coming to our Tech Talk, our monthly Tech Talk. So we're really excited and honored today to have Dr. Frey from MUSC to give us a talk on data integration strategies for interoperable precision medicine. And we are really happy because, in fact, we've known Lewis for several years now, since because he is a very active member of our ACCEL-CTR BERD, the Biostatistics Epidemiology Research Design Core. Before I introduce him, let me mention some housekeeping issues. As always, instructions to obtain CME credit are...
Sir, we do have copies if you need the CME credits.
Okay, are on the paper over here. And we can also email you instructions if you provide your address on the sign-in sheet. Do not miss the November 15th ID series, our Innovative Discovery series. Our own Dr. Scott Siegel from here, from the Value Institute at Christiana Care. We talk about rethinking population health, disproven assumptions, unintended consequences, and developing a new framework to get it right. So that's tomorrow. So do not miss it. And again, you can register through the Christiana Care portal through ID series. For December 5th, we have another Tech Talk that is planned. We had a cancellation, so we may have or we may not have. So we are looking for a speaker right now for Tech Talk. So we'll keep you posted. So Dr. Lewis Frey is Associate Professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences at MUSC, Medical University of South Carolina. He's also a research scientist at the Veteran Administration in the Health Equity and Rural Outreach Innovation Center. He obtained a Ph.D. from Vanderbilt University from the School of Engineering in Computer Science. And he's also now the chair of the Student Progress Committee at MUSC and Clemson University for the joint Biomedical Data Science and Informatics Ph.D. program. He's also the chair of the IT Committee in the Public Health Sciences Department, and is internationally renowned as he's also the chair of the International Medical Informatics Association, the Genomics Work Group. Lewis received multiple awards, the last one in 2019 when he received a featured paper award for artificial intelligence and integrated genotype-phenotype identification. He is or has been PI or co-investigator on multiple grants from NIH and also the VA. He has a long list of peer-reviewed publications. He's a teacher and a very active mentor for graduate students. So we are really honored to have him today, giving us a talk. And we can't wait.
And thank you for inviting me. This is a lot of fun putting this together. So let's get started with it. So the objectives: discuss strategies to integrate data for precision medicine. Describe the benefits of an infrastructure as code solution. I'll get into that detail. You have a better understanding of that. Understand generalizability, replicability, agility, flexibility, infrastructure, and cloud computing in the context of healthcare infrastructure. Okay, so we'll go over each one of those examples and cases where we put them together. So, so the NCI, you got to start somewhere with the definition of precision medicine. NCI has a pretty decent one. Form of medicine that uses information about a person's genes, proteins, environment to prevent, diagnose, and treat disease. You're using specific information to influence the treatment plan of the individual, and they give examples of it, such as HER2-positive breast cancer, where that genetic information can influence what treatment the patient gets, and then you could have improved treatment from that. So you have tumor biomarkers and such to help diagnose. Okay, that's kind of precision medicine in an overview. And there's 2015. Obama announced the Precision Medicine Initiative, and it changed a little bit in the definition. So I look at it from the informatics point of view. If we're dealing with information, how do you process information? What do you want to do with it? So for the precision medicine informatics as a field of research that accelerates replicable knowledge discovery, personalized medical treatments through access to integrated, individualized information. Okay? So, and you guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're here.
Good. There was one time I gave a presentation about 15. As I started, it cut out. So I just want to check. Okay. So, so defining precision medicine. This is we did a special issue on precision medicine related to the translational summit on that its special topic was accelerating precision medicine, and it tied in with in 2015. Obama just happened to announce the Precision Medicine Initiative to keep ourselves and our families healthier through access to personalized information, and we had kind of four areas that we focused on. So the previous definition kind of summarizes these areas. Big data, where you're integrating and standardizing large data sets. Learning systems, and when I talk about learning systems, I'm really talking about artificial intelligence. That's kind of my focus, where you have individual involvement and access to, the patient has access to their clinical data. And that's a big part of it. This concept of access is kind of a differentiator when you're dealing with precision medicine, because you're dealing with such large data sets, and how do people kind of get to view their own data and interact with it? And then precision treatment, how to improve overall treatments of care. Okay, why now? Why is precision medicine a big thing? Why is there initiative on it? Well, one is we have more data than we have more information now than we've had before. We've gone from paper records to electronic records. We have an increase in the information and types of information that we have access to, and we have more powerful computers and algorithms for computation, and that's a big change. Okay, we can now do things with computers that we couldn't do quite recently, and the reduced cost of collecting information, executing computationally intensive analysis is within reach for things that we couldn't do in the past. Okay, so this is the growth of healthcare information. So growth in healthcare information, this is Bill Stead, Vanderbilt, where in 2007, he basically said, use the human cognitive capacity, which is we can store about 7 things in our short-term memory, plus or minus 2. We put it at the lower bound. So about 5 things for making a clinical decision around a phenotype. The type is a disease manifestation. Point was, look, the information is just growing by leaps and bounds. We have, structural genetics, single nucleotide polymorphisms, haplotypes that are relevant to clinical decision making. How do we incorporate that information? Functional genomic information, gene expression information. How is that integrated? Proteomics, the proteins involved. These things are relevant to clinical decision making. They're coming on board in incredibly fast ways. How do we integrate it into care? Okay. He was a little prophetic in that was in 2007 and 2008. The bottom fell out of the cost of collecting genomic information. Basically, next generation hit. This is Moore's law, which we know that in relationship to computers, where the cost of computers, the size of computer that you can get doubles every about 18 months or so for the same cost, right? So that means that we now have cell phones that we carry around that are little computers that are incredibly powerful compared to the computers of yesteryear. The genome was tracking at that same rate, and then it just completely fell off. So we're down into the range of $1,000 genome, and this becoming accessible broadly for clinical care. So to me, all of that data then speaks of, we have data, we have improved computational power. To me, that's perfect area for the application of artificial intelligence. This is a paper on artificial intelligence and integrated genotype-phenotype identification. Alan Turing kind of is one of the fathers of computer science, a lot like Cumberbund. But if you remember this is the movie The Imitation Game. And that title comes from a paper that Turing did in 1915, which basically established the concept of artificial intelligence, where the imitation game is you have two people, one trying to pretend to be something that they're not, and one being that actual thing, that entity, and then another person, a third person, that's judging between which one is telling the truth or not. Okay, so it's basically you have an imitator, two people, and one of them is an imitator. And he said, well, what happens if you put a computer in that? Can it bluff its way through enough? He basically predicted by 2020 our perceptions of that, the ability to achieve the imitation game will completely change. And that's taken place. Chess champion using artificial intelligence in before the year 2000. And this is the cost of, and he basically said it would come down to kind of three things: compute, memory, and algorithms, right? Compute, it went from trillions of dollars down to pennies today. And the same thing with memory, huge amounts of money in the 1960s down to, hundreds of dollars, or very inexpensive, okay? This has changed the game where we can now do computation that we couldn't do before, and this is artificial intelligence publications from PubMed are, increasing in relationship. This drop off right here, this figure, that's the cost of genomes dropping off. Okay, so you can see that it's huge. It's following Moore's law around here and then drops off, but it's in relationship to a much bigger phenomenon that's going on. We have this compute now, which then allows us to get to there's a technology that's now capable called deep learning. Cracked the object recognition and vision problem. The huge area of research we can now tie it into deep genome and deep phenome. So when I talk about learning systems, I'm really talking about artificial intelligence, and that this big data in relationship to precision medicine is a perfect area of synergy. Okay, so in the title of this talk, we talked about interoperability. This is HIMSS definition of it: interoperability, ability of different information systems, devices, and application systems to access, exchange, integrate, and cooperatively use data in a coordinated manner within and across organizational, regional, and national boundaries, so to provide timely and seamless portability of information and optimize the health of individuals and populations globally. Okay, big mouthful. Not only that, it's almost like it was written by consultants, because somebody reads this off to you, hold on to your wallet. This is going to be expensive, right? You're talking about across institutional lines, and basically this definition, this is part of the definition of interoperability. I think we need to change our perception of what we mean when we're talking about interoperability. What's the return on investment on this task? And does it need to be this at this scale, or can it be at different scales? But lack of interoperability is certainly holding back progress in the field. Okay, so anybody familiar with Big Endian, Little Endian War?
Yeah.
What? So what is it?
Order of bits.
I don't remember.
Oh, you're talking about
The Gulliver.
I
Gulliver
thought you were talking about
travel.
computers.
Oh.
Well, okay, so yeah, it's in both. So it's in Gulliver's Travels. The Big Endian, Little Endian War is the war between the Lilliputians and the Bluffiscutians. And the reason for the war is that the Lilliputians crack their egg at the little end,
Yeah.
and the Bluffiscutians crack their egg at the big end. Point being was it was a war of no importance. I mean, it was hubris for these two sides to be fighting, and Gulliver brought them together. This, in computer science, there was a similar, actually it was referred to as the Big Endian, Little Endian War, where one group, which was Sun Microsystems, which is now Oracle, and another group, Intel, had architectures that were encoded data from the least significant bit, like floating point numbers, from the least significant bit, which would be the little endian, and the other encoded floating point numbers at the most significant bit. What this meant is these two machines could not talk with each other. They were foreign language. Interoperability was not part of their interactions. So the thing is, it's not talked about today because it was solved primarily through virtualization. They encoded a little piece of code that if you were in a big endian system, you would convert it to your internet protocol endianness, and then if another machine is giving you data, you would then convert it out of that internet protocol endianness into your local site's endianness. Okay, so in other words, that allowed computer systems to communicate. We don't talk about it today. I would say that healthcare has the same type of issue, and that virtualization and infrastructure as code is a way of dealing with this this big endian, little endianness across healthcare systems that are, in essence, creating data silos. Okay, so to do this, we'll talk about a couple applications, examples that we've done. One, virtualization among 8 children's hospitals, and another a set of examples on C3PPO, an open source clinical personalized pragmatic predictions of outcomes system, which is a big data platform, and we utilize it for different projects, research projects, at the Medical University of South Carolina, Veterans Affairs, Informatics and Computing Infrastructure, Vinci environment, and this is kind of where I deal with big data, and MUSC Transdisciplinary Collaborative Center here, and then Christiana Care Health Systems in Delaware. So we'll go over those examples. So infrastructure as code, the method for formally defining coded instructions, how to set up computers and provision and manage them. The instructions are executed so the structure and vision in the code is realized across one or more computers. Okay, and you can use this for multiple types of questions in healthcare, data integration, predictive analytics for precision medicine. Questions at this point, just as I've already gone over a lot, certainly in relationship to computer science and the like. Are there questions? Okay, so I said the word virtualization. What do I mean by virtualization, and why is it a potential solution? So virtualization can result in what are called virtual machines, basically encoding a pre-specified computer as this virtual encoded concept, where you have a hypervisor on the target computer system that you're deploying your system to, that runs and then can run that virtual machine that you've encoded. Now, hypervisor can be thought of as a hyper supervisor that micromanages every action of the virtual machine. I'm sure nobody's ever run into a hyper supervisor in their own workplace, but you get it basically keeps the virtual machine out of trouble in the target environment that it's working in. Okay, so that's a big step towards creating a way of having an infrastructure that can integrate data and get to these large scales that are going to be needed for precision. So you can think of a virtual machine as a code emulation of a physical computer where it has binaries, executable files, and libraries that it runs its code, and it has its own operating system. So it could be Linux or Windows or Apple or whatever you want it to be, but it has its own operating system. And then it then is run on the target machine. So here's the virtual machine. Here's the hypervisor on the target machine. You can then deploy multiple virtual machines onto this target machine, which has its own hardware and its own operating system. And then the hypervisor translates between whatever operating systems are in the virtual machines, translates that to the current operating system and the hardware there. So it keeps these machines running as if they were running in their own operating system world. Okay, and hence don't have this big endian, little endian. It no longer matters. You code everything in the machine and then share information associated with that machine. So
that's a question.
Yeah, go ahead. We have a question, Louis. Go ahead.
How is this different than a cluster?
Well, so there's different meanings of clusters. So you could by when you say cluster, what type of cluster are you thinking about?
I guess like you've harnessed a lot of computer power to
right.
run a process that isn't feasible on a single machine.
Right. So a cluster is a set of computers that are running together, and they could be running on what's referred to as bare metal. They could be running their own operating system against the hardware itself, and those machines are communicating with each other via their set of protocols. You set that up, and that's kind of, if it was on bare metal, it's most likely kind of hardwired into that location where that cluster is built. You could create a virtual machine cluster also, which is basically you code the machines. That's in essence what we've done with C3PO, where they have different services, and those services interact in a set of virtual machines. They're just not, built for the bare metal that they're running on. Okay, so you can use a cluster as a concept of you have this set of machines that is doing a particular functionality, and it can be virtual or bare metal. So these machines, virtual machines, can be used to set up a cluster. Does that answer your question, Taylor?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay. So distributed VM clones. So you basically can encapsulate the set of processes that you want to use to do analysis at a particular site, and it's especially relevant for big data where the cost is associated with getting the data. If you have petabytes of data, the cost of transferring those petabytes of data to a central location is cost prohibitive. So we need mechanisms for getting the compute to the data and then running that compute on the data. Okay? And let's see if I say it in the next. Yes. And part of that, in having that compute on the data, is you have common data models that the system can use, common code base, and distributed clones of the virtual machines. The idea here is, we saw that earlier definition from HIMSS, almost written by a consultant, on what interoperability is. To achieve it is extremely hard. In this case of virtual machines, you're creating clones of. So in other words, the virtual machines are identical and hence 100% interoperable because they're all processing the data in the exact same way. So it's actually achievable to get a component of that definition of interoperability using a virtual machine. Okay.
So may I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
So do you need to build the common data model prior to implementing the virtual machine on each of the data system that you have? So, if you have data in a certain model at MUSC and data at Care, do you need to build first the common data model and then implement the virtual machines?
No. You can specify. I mean, you can create a subset of the data in terms of that data that you want to have a common analysis on. So in essence, you don't have to go the full-blown data model. You could have a specific subset of data that the format for, and that's what you're sharing across. That format is what you're consistently using for analysis across systems. I'm interested in the common data model where it has this concept of an internet protocol. How do we get a system where we have common ways of encoding data across multiple healthcare environments? Right now, kind of the big endian, little endian is you have Epic systems and you have Cerner systems, and even within Epic systems, they're site-specific in terms of their implementation. So having them talk with each other gets really quite complicated. And so my position is we need to move towards a common data model representation to be able to have that internet protocol kind of for the big endian, little endian solution where you can move data in and out of it rather freely. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I was just wondering because putting together a very comprehensive common data model is extremely, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money in terms of funding. So
right.
Are there ways of not having to do, a common data model between institutions and run all kinds of models that you are interested in?
Yeah,
but
and the answer is
right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. You can just basically specify a particular protocol for the study that you're looking at, and do that analysis using the virtual machine. And I've done that for different projects. It's completely feasible to do it that way. In a bigger context, in terms of if we put these systems together, how can we move in that direction? Well, I'll touch on that in a couple of slides. But this is and there's a bit of alphabet soup here. You don't have to really process everything. Other than there's tooling out of Google. Google supports Kubernetes, which is a tooling and language for constructing clusters, sets of computers, some of which can be Docker, containerized virtual machine representations, and this is one of the architectures that we use that then can support big data infrastructures. This infrastructure, the Hadoop distributed file system, basically can scale to arbitrary sizes of data, dependent on how much computer resources that you have, where traditional relational databases would break down. And it does that, like as how it's displayed here, through replication and redundancy. So if one computer system fails, you don't lose data you have triple redundancy, so you only you have the data in other places, and the system self-heals. But that means that you could conceivably have all your clinical data in one place, along with imaging data and genomic data and proteomic data, all stored within the same system at scale and in a computable format using this type of technology. Okay. This is the OMOP model. Claudine was saying it's expensive to put things into these data sets, or these data models, and data models are not agnostic. They have a particular model that they're imposing upon the data. I use this, or see the importance of this, is the OMOP Common Data Model, the Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership model. It has international acceptance. The big part of it for me, why I like this model so much, is it's tied in with standardized vocabularies. And we'll see from some of the other work that I've done that standardized vocabularies can save you a lot in relationship to interoperability, cost of it. Also happens to be that in the VA, they've converted all of their data into this model. So we have about 24 to 25 million patients that are already encoded in this data in the VA. So I build my systems in relationship to this just because we have a lot of information already there. So that would be kind of the phenotype or phenomic data of the patients, all of their diseases, their transitions over time, et cetera. But we're talking about precision medicine, which is multi-ohmic, ohmic being high throughput data. And how do we combine that type of data with clinical data? It's certainly on the research side. I'm not saying it has to be on the operational side, but on the research side. Requires robust metadata documentation, consistent analysis with sharing, and a common taxonomy so that we kind of have the same language for expressing these things. There's a paper towards taxonomy for multi-ohmic science that does a really nice job of putting together a taxonomy and terms in this space. This is in terms of the overwhelming amount of data that's coming on board that Bill Stead was talking about in that exponential increasing data. These are the different types of data that are involved in that. Some of them we're quite used to seeing. Phenomics would be like the clinical data associated with the patient, what's their diseases, signs, symptoms. Others would be other things we're very familiar with, environmental omics, chemical toxins in the environment, et cetera, organisms, bacteria, viral infections. They're basically an omic environmental aspect. And pharmacogenomics, drugs. Okay, patients are given drugs, and this is now interacting in a space is really organized around the genome, where you can look at multi-species. You have mouse models, for example, that are preclinical that are used to inform what kind of clinical care is going to go on in patients. So you can have align these things based around genomic sequences, and then tie the different types of omics data all the way up to proteomics around the patient. Okay, so we have to start thinking about this much broader space as we are moving into precision medicine. Okay, so this is you're supposed to kind of scale out, so there's a little bit of text on this, but this is the infrastructure code model. Okay, where you have methods for defining the instructions for provisioning and managing computers. You have a consistent, at least for your studies, taxonomy of the types of data that you're working with, and the infrastructure as code can be developed at one particular site, distributed to multiple institutions as either bare metal machines or virtual machines. as this encoded body of clustered computers. And this is the big endian, little endian reference. Okay, so a cloud is a distributed data center, such as the Amazon Web Service, good for global analysis, and you can do computation on a large scale in it. Latency of data transmission is not a concern when you're working in the cloud, because your application shouldn't be a concern for that application. If it is, then you should be working in the fog, which is a cloud close to the ground. So in other words, it's a local cloud system closer to your center. Okay. So you're either in the clouds, in a fog, or running on bare metal. So it's different aspects of analysis. Okay, but we'll need this combination of management to handle the influx of data and data types that are occurring here in precision medicine. Okay, am I too far ahead of myself? Well, not really. This is already happening. Okay. Healthcare environments are already using clouds. Universities of California, San Diego, health systems, multi-year migration to move their data to an Epic in the cloud. And then Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, adoption of Amazon's cloud for storing 7 petabytes of their EHR data. Okay, people are already making this move of their entire healthcare record system into Amazon's web service. Okay, so this is happening currently. To get this question of adoption, how do people start? Why would people start using this? I really think it comes down to 4 areas, and I'll go over example use cases of these 4 areas. I have about 20 minutes left. Claudine, do you want me to leave time for questions at the end?
Oh, that'd be great. 5 minutes, if you could.
Okay, 5 minutes for questions. Okay, so I'll go over each one of this: agility, replicability, generalizability, and flexibility in relationship to particular applications that's been deployed. Agility, think of that as enabling fast deployment and evolution of the system in the environment that you're developing in. So it's basically tied to where you're deploying. Example of this was the VM interoperability among children's hospitals that I deployed, where it was an agile deployment where we connected 8 children's hospitals, a national network research consortium using VirtualBox, VM virtual machine systems, VMware and VirtualBox, and supported secure data communication protocols using Globus, which is this technology for security. We found that the deployment could be done in a short period of time, within hours, establish the virtual machines, databases, and secure connections for this deployment. The other aspect of it was it showed where did we get return on our investment? And this is the thing, when people talk about interoperability, they don't really talk about what it's going to, it's almost like, well, of course you want to be interoperable, right? But they don't really say, well, how is it going to benefit you, and how interoperable do you need, and what are the things about interoperability that gives you the bang for your buck? And so in this children's network, children's care, critically ill and injured children, they had a way of using comma-separated value files for sharing data, and we examined it and saw that their percent of format misalignments were going up. Okay, then we instituted it in 2011, and then validated it in 2012, and basically showed that we could reduce this type of error in their system quite substantially, down to 1% of the data. We could also get reuse out of our extraction, transform, and load scripts to get about 91% of the data over just by reusing those load scripts. And that 8% of the data, the errors in the data, could be managed through moderate curation of a consistent lookup dictionary. Okay, so you're at 99% of the data relatively moderate curation levels for sharing information. This is the power of interoperability. Okay. In essence, I mean, where we got the big lift here was that we established a protocol for sharing data that was at the site that could be validated before sending it, and it cleaned things up. This would take months, so sometimes upwards of 6 months for the sites to work out all the errors that had crept into their data transfer. And then you get into all kinds of issues of who has HIPAA compliance to see the data to correct the error, because people at a central site might not have IRB approval at the site to see the data. So it gets into this whole issue of the complexities of coordinating over data. So interoperability vastly improved with this kind of virtualized web service type technology. And a big part of this was it was social technical solutions. We had to go to the sites, talk with the chief information officers. There were aspects, concerns about security and the like that had to be addressed with those meetings. And this kind of mirrors what goes on a national scale with kind of political consensus and conjunction with goals of science and increasing knowledge and insight. In other words, we're in a social technical milieu, and you need to approach that when you're doing these agile deployments. Okay, the technology advances. As technology to support infrastructure as code advances, so too can the system. So C3PO, its first version used scripted code and web services. Second version used Puppet and Vagrant scripts for managing the infrastructure as code. Third version used Ansible, Kubernetes, Docker. So these are tools for managing system deployments. So it's agile in relationship to the code as developed. Technological approaches that are developed along with it. Replicability supports local and distributed testing of infrastructure to hardened systems. This was extremely important in the case of the Veteran Affairs deployment, where we have 24 million patients in the data warehouse. Of course, thousands of researchers. This isn't our system, that's their system, the Vinci system. So their specifications for deployment are you're not going to be able to generate virtual machines in our environment, but you can tell us what virtual machines you want generated in. So you can specify it, and then we'll monitor those systems through our monitoring protocols. So it's much more like you're interacting with a service provider, that you can specify what are the infrastructures that you're using. So in the VA, they set up what we specified them to set up, which was the Hadoop distributed file system, and then we connected with it through our services for relevant feature selection. This was examining diabetes, cohort selection, and predictive analytics in this data set. What was important with this is when they built that system, it didn't work. It worked on our system, but it didn't work. When our system connected with it, it didn't work. But because we knew everything that was in their system, we could replicate it 100%, in essence, clone it locally, investigate it locally, break it locally so it would generate the same errors, okay? And then we told the Vinci folks, if you go to this one file deep within the Hadoop system and twiddle this bit, it will work. And they did that, and it did. Okay, so that's an example of replication and what I would consider, real interoperability. You be able to get to, because they're identical with each other when you set them up that way, you can really, speed development and actually make a project that would have failed without that bit being twiddled, because that's the way they set it up, to one that we accomplished our goals. Okay, so generalizability. Allows for building and reusing the infrastructure across multiple projects. This is the MUSC Transdisciplinary Collaborative Center. C3PO was used as infrastructure as code in it. In the common data model OMOP, it's been able to be used in this new case where we're examining prostate cancer and the effects of chronic stress on patients in rural and urban environments. Okay, so we took C3PO that we built for other projects and we put it into this use case and changed components of it to make it support this use case. And this is the transcriptome signature. This is one of the, this is a paper that we're working on. We had 33 African Americans, 27 European Americans, and these are the genes that are upregulated in prostate cancer in general. What was interesting is that in African Americans, they had higher GULM, which is Golgi membrane protein 1, also higher stress-associated endoplasmic reticulum protein. And since our hypothesis is we're looking at the impacts of stress on African Americans who we know have a more aggressive phenotype of the cancer, we're examining that element. And part of the stress signature has to do with the tumors are producing a lot of proteins, and their ER and Golgi are under stress. So the ER is the endoplasmic reticulum, things for making proteins. And GULM1, what it does in liver cancer, and there's evidence also for it in prostate cancer, is it recycles an oncogenic gene, EGFR, epidermal growth factor receptor, to the cell surface. What that means is these tissues are going to be highly proliferative. They're going to be growing. You're going to be growing large tumors. You might not see an EGFR signal in the RNA. It might not be producing more RNA, but what you're doing is with GULM1, it's increasing the half-life of the EGFR receptor on the cell surface, which means these things will be growing. So the idea is we're working on, and we've submitted this paper to Nature Genetics at this point, so it's under review currently. But the idea is you could have a treatment that's specific to African American population with more aggressive cancer when they have these types of markers. Questions with this? Okay, so flexibility provides the ability to choose among multiple integration strategy architectures. This is Christiana Care, so you guys might be interested in this. And probably will generate some questions, so I'll try and get through it in 2 minutes so you have some time for questions on it. We deployed a virtual machine infrastructure at Christiana Care to replicate analysis that we've done at MUSC. We had identical machines at MUSC to do the analysis and replicated the analysis at Christiana Care. Just integrated summary of the results with no centralization of the data. Okay? The concept here is data sharing agreements and the like, it can become cumbersome, especially if you're going across international borders. It would be nice to have this virtual machine infrastructure as code to deploy these things to centers that have data and do identical analysis across different. This was relevant because at MUSC, we had a patient-centered medical home study where we looked at clustering our patient population and utilization across the internal medicine department. We had a couple of clusters, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, renal failure, and congestive heart failure, and showed that with an intervention of wrapping services around these particular clusters of patients, we could reduce their emergency department visits and overall hospital utilization. So basically, wrapping services around this. So the question is, we have this cluster at MUSC, these clusters at MUSC of obesity, hypertension, multiple conditions, COPD, renal failure, where you can actually wrap services around these particular groups. Does that generalize to Christiana Care? So we had about 10,000 patients at MUSC, and at Christiana Care, we had 80,000 patients. And remarkably, I was really surprised, we had the same we had the same types of clusters. So we had obesity, hypertension, multiple chronic conditions, COPD, and renal failure. And then in addition to that, Christiana Care had diabetes and depression in their clusters. MUSC also had depression, but it was kind of spread out. If you had a smaller number of clusters, it was spread out among them, and there's done some papers on the significance of depression. We also had similar, I'm not going into it here, but we had similar risk models predict hospital utilization at Christiana Care that was comparable to that was done at MUSC. Okay. Security is still an issue, but it's not insurmountable. There's ways of dealing with scoping privileges and nesting containers. So in conclusion, turning to cloud as an alternative to data centers that are ill-prepared to manage the volumes of data is a viable alternative. Complexities of clinical data do not go away. They are integral into the problem. The use of agile development pipelines of infrastructure as code in the emerging paradigm will help us reach our goals of an integrated analysis across multiple. Just acknowledgements: Patrick Maldon, Jihad, Bill Moran, William Weintraub, Mitch, and Claudine, and it was part of this work was supported by the IDEAS grant by Binder McCloy. Thanks.
Thank you so much. There is any question?
I have a question, but it's actually about the project that you guys submitted for review. How are you measuring stress?
Excellent question. So there's different metrics that we have on that. One, they're doing questionnaires on the population, look at financial stress, if they self-report stress, that type of information. They're also doing natural language processing on clinical notes to try and identify measures of stress in the clinical notes. And there's some on some of the cohort, they have stress tests that they're giving on the patients. That's kind of at a high level. In that one paper that we're dealing with, we're basically picking up stress signatures at the molecular level, like the stress of the endoplasmic reticulum in protein manufacture and that type of thing. So it's different scales of examining stress.
Gotcha. I'm a sociologist, so I'm thinking in terms of your population and whether or not they're predisposed to stress based on the environment from which they come, and if you're kind of accounting for that.
And the answer to that is yes. We have a CIS expert on that, and they're examining the environments that they're in, and that's part of the stress signature of crime in the areas, financial or food deserts, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mitch?
Yeah, hi, Liz. It's Mitch. I don't know if you
Hey,
can see me. I'm hiding. But yeah, that was a really cool presentation, and I just wanted to kind of highlight like a real important point that you made, that one thing you're really doing here is you're moving sort of the computational power to the data. And what folks might not realize is when we say big data, we're talking like, in some cases, humongous data, that if you were to try to transfer that, even if you had a data use agreement, if you wanted to move it to another location over even a high-speed internet line, it could take weeks, months even. It's a real consideration. In fact, there's instances where people actually take their hard drives, stacks of hard drives, put them in a suitcase, and hire somebody to fly them to a location because it's faster and cheaper than to try to push it through the traditional wires, so to speak. So I just want to kind of highlight that. So that's really cool that you can do that. I did have. Sorry, didn't mean to
No, go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But my real question was, you mentioned a couple of places that are using AWS, Amazon Web Services, the cloud, for their analyzing clinical data, and I'm just wondering about the whole PHI issue there, and how do they solve that?
Right. So Amazon Web Services has HIPAA compliant components of their system, and so that's a specific deal between Amazon and the site, where that's all pre-specified and compliant in that way. I'm sure the same goes for the Epic installation in their particular cloud. So that those data privacy issues can be taken care of at a kind of institutional level as they go into these agreements.
Thank you.
So I also have a question, just to make sure that I understand. So on your last project, the prostate cancer project, so you had EHR data, you had genomics data, you had environmental data, you had questionnaire data, like what Janisa was talking about, to measure stress. And so with C3PO, you were able to assemble all these data into one analytical data set. Is it what you are?
That's the overarching goal. At this point, we've integrated the questionnaire data and the AHR data, and then we did analysis on the separately on the genomic data. Going forward, we have proteomic data associated with a glycan signature, and that will go into C3PO for the analysis of that project. So it would be genomic information associated with the clinical information stored in C3PO.
And I guess the genomic information are somewhere at MUSC, and your clinical information is, EPIC, also at MUSC, and with C3PO, you are the virtual computer. You are picking up this data, but the database do not move.
Right. The databases don't move. We've loaded the data from the data warehouse. Actually, we coordinated it with RedCap, and also RedCap. We use RedCap for collecting the questionnaire data, and then had it flow into a OMOP data model that was using the Hadoop distributed file system to manage the data. So the idea there is you can then grow. We're dealing with proteomic data, which includes imaging data. You can grow blobs of data that is then distributed across this big data system. It doesn't care what the data is. It just kind of stores it as bits and bytes, but you can then pull it out and operate on it outside of the system or interacting with the system.
So do you pull also genomics then and proteomics into OMOP? No.
So that's the OMOP is, although OMOP wants to move in the direction of genomics, we don't. So you have the OMOP model is storing the phenomic data, the phenotype data of the clinic, and then in that same system you have particular file data types and the like that are also in that system. Now they're coexisting in the same data system, so you can still bind them to each other and do analysis, with them tightly integrated. But they're not all in OMOP.
And do you also have imaging data with all this for this project?
With the proteomic data that we're moving to, that's kind of that's the next iteration of it. Yes, we have imaging data with that we're going to integrate.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
I just have
one basic question.
Sure.
How do you deal with, like, I know there's a lot of things up in the cloud, but how does like a hospital itself deal with like security of like people trying to get in the cloud? Like, are there like security features and stuff like, I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so that would be the example of Beth Israel Deaconess, where they moved 7 petabytes. They basically moved their entire electronic health record into the cloud, Amazon Web Services. And that was a special deal between Amazon and that hospital network. And with it, I'm assuming they have some type of data connection capability that has role responsibilities associated with it. So only certain people can see that data when they view it in the cloud. But that would be the way of addressing the security with that. Now I don't think it's the same as I think it's primarily for research. It's not their operational system. So, but it's on the research.
Okay.
Any other question? Great. Well, thank you so much, Lewis. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.